I never planned to come to Ireland. It wasn't some romantic notion of reconnecting with my roots, nor was it part of some grand adventure. I had no itinerary, no expectations, just a one-way ticket and a desperate need to disappear. When I left Albany, I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my parents, not my friends, not even my lawyer. I just packed a bag, sold my car, and got on the first flight that felt far enough away. The airport in Dublin was a blur: immigration, baggage claim, the smell of cheap coffee lingering in the air. I rented a bike because I didn't want to be tied to one place. The plan was simple: keep moving. I didn't stay in hotels, didn't book anything in advance. I picked small towns at random, checking into bed and breakfasts with cash and fake smiles, staying just long enough to blend in before vanishing again. It worked for a while. The long rides through the Irish countryside gave me the illusion of freedom. But the thing about running is that eventually you get tired. I woke to someone shaking me hard, my mind struggling to catch up. My head pounded, my body sluggish. Before I could even figure out where I was, hands dragged me upright. The urgency in the air hit me like a slap. Something was wrong. As my senses sharpened, the words sank in. A heart attack. Someone needed help. I stumbled out of the small room, shoeless, still feeling the weight of last night's drinks. We rushed down a hallway, my vision adjusting to the dim light, until we reached an office. A policewoman was kneeling over a large man in uniform, desperately attempting CPR. That's when it clicked. I was in a police station. I dropped to my knees and checked for a pulse. Nothing, no breath. Instinct took over. I barked out for a defibrillator, barely registering the woman bolting from the room. I started chest compressions, my head still fogged with Guinness, but my hands steady. She returned, holding an AED. I tore open the man's uniform, placed the electrodes, and activated the machine. The first shock, nothing. The second, still no response. Frustration burned through me. One more. The machine beeped, normal rhythm. My shoulders sagged in relief as I pressed a hand to his chest. A heartbeat, weak, but there. I looked up. The policewoman had called for an ambulance, but it wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes. My body reminded me of its own needs. My armpits were damp, my bladder full. I had her take over monitoring the sergeant's pulse while I found the nearest restroom. After what felt like an eternity, I stepped back into the hallway. A few officers had gathered, watching me like I was some strange specimen. One, barely out of his teens, hesitantly explained where I was: Castleroy, in a Garda station. Apparently, I had passed out at a pub last night, and a local had brought me here. To make things worse, I had apparently been ranting about escaping from a woman of easy virtue. Fantastic. Before I could cringe too much, the wail of sirens signaled the ambulance's arrival. The paramedics took over, running their checks before loading the sergeant onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him out, I exhaled, my job done. I turned back toward the small room, spotting my boots and jacket still where I'd left them. A minor miracle. I checked my pockets, wallet and phone still there. I asked the policewoman if I was free to go. She gave me a silent nod. Sitting down, I pulled on my boots, shaking my head at the night before. Whatever had landed me here, I'd sobered up fast. I stepped into the main office, feeling the weight of several silent stares from the officers. No one spoke, and I took that as a good sign. Whatever trouble I had caused last night at the pub had been forgiven. Still, the dizziness from my hangover crept in. I needed to get out of here. When I asked where I was staying, the officers all turned their heads in the same direction, as if they could see through the thick stone walls. Turned out my B&B was just a short walk away. Stepping outside, I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp morning air clear my head. My body craved rest, a hot shower, coffee, and food, in that exact order. I stopped at a small shop, bought a bottle of water, and downed it in one go. By the time I reached the B&B, the woman who ran the place greeted me with a knowing smile. She already knew about my night. Apparently, when I hadn't returned after the pub closed, she called the Gardaí to check on me. They'd assured her I was safe, just sleeping off a few too many pints in one of their holding rooms. I barely had time to respond before her husband walked in, grinning. News had spread. The officers had called him earlier and told him what I had done for Sergeant O'Boyle. He wasted no time announcing that they had a hero staying with them. His wife rushed in from the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. Apparently, my attempts to downplay the situation were useless. Bill, the husband, explained with dramatic flair how I had revived the sergeant with CPR and a defibrillator. They both looked at me expectantly, waiting for a grand retelling of the event, but all I really wanted was coffee. Mary returned moments later with a fresh pot, and I wasted no time pouring myself a cup. Breakfast followed, a plate piled with eggs, ham, fried tomatoes, beans, and toast. As I ate, I thought about the sergeant. With meals like this every morning, Bill was probably right. His heart attack had been a long time coming. Once I finished, I headed to my room, took a long, hot shower, and collapsed into bed. Sleep hit me like a wave. Somewhere between consciousness and dreams, I found myself reflecting on how I ended up here. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm 33 years old, 5'11", 170 pounds, with black hair and blue eyes. I was, maybe still am, an orthopedic surgeon in Albany. 2 years out of my residency, I worked at a university hospital. I was also married. Madeline McDonald Brown, was an elementary school teacher born and raised in Albany. We had no kids. My parents had retired to North Carolina, escaping the brutal New York winters, and my sister lived in Connecticut with her husband and 2 boys. So, why was I in Ireland? That was the real question. The truth? I ran. I left Albany a month ago after my marriage collapsed. The details didn't matter, but the pain did. A few weeks into my self-imposed exile, I found myself in Ireland, traveling the countryside on a second-hand Honda CRF 250, a lightweight dirt bike I picked up in Dublin. I packed light, whatever could fit in my side panniers. Everything else had been donated or thrown away. Last night at the pub, I must have vented more than I realized. Too much Guinness turns into a confession booth, and now, half the town probably knew my story. But for now, I didn't care. I let sleep take me, pulling me away from thoughts of Maddie, Albany, and whatever came next. I hadn't planned on running, but when everything collapsed, leaving felt like the only option. A friend had given me advice before I left. He'd walked a similar road, leaving behind an unfaithful wife. I had done the same a month ago. Maddie came from a big family, 2 brothers and a sister. Lana, the homemaker with a young child. Rob, the aircraft mechanic. Barry, the successful contractor. Her parents, retired and well off, lived comfortably in Albany, traveling in their luxury motorhome, completely unaware of the storm that had been brewing in their daughter's marriage. As a doctor, my life had always been different. Long hours, demanding schedules. There was little time for a personal life, especially in the early years. That reality had been part of the problem. A friend and colleague, Dave Walters, had faced the same issue. His wife had been unfaithful, just like mine. He'd moved on, found happiness with a woman he met in Africa, and started a new life. I wasn't there yet. Maddie and I had been married for 4 years. We had no children, at least I didn't. She did. A baby girl, born just weeks ago. Not mine. The revelation had been brutal. Sitting in the delivery room, holding Maddie's hand, I had no idea what was coming. When the baby arrived, the doctor's reaction said everything. Her eyes widened before she turned to look at me. I barely had time to process it before she quietly took the scissors from my hand, cutting the umbilical cord herself. The nurses moved quickly, whispering among themselves as they tended to the newborn. The baby was clearly mixed race, impossible to explain away. I sat there, staring at Maddie as she held her child, waiting for some kind of explanation. She said nothing. I walked out. I never spoke to Maddie again. Her parents called the next day, leaving voicemails begging me to talk. When I finally answered, her mother asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive Maddie and raise the child as my own. I asked her one question. Could you? There was silence. No answer. I hung up. Before leaving the hospital, I made sure my name wouldn't appear on the birth certificate. Then I walked away from everything. Back home, I packed the essentials. A few clothes, my iPad, a couple of keepsakes from med school. The wedding ring stayed behind on the kitchen table. That night, I checked into a hotel near my hospital. My hospital, not the one where Maddie had given birth. I sat in that sterile, impersonal room, numb, trying to process what had just happened. Days later, I found myself in Castleroy, drowning my thoughts in pints of Guinness, spilling my story to strangers. The morning after my drunken confessions, people from town started showing up at the B&B. First was Mrs. O'Boyle, the sergeant's wife. She thanked me for saving what she called her useless husband, though that was a story for another time. She insisted on offering help, wanting to repay me somehow. I told her I'd visit the sergeant when he was allowed visitors, probably in a day or two. For now, all I could do was take things one step at a time. The mayor of Castleroy showed up at the B&B with a small entourage, clearly curious about the American doctor who had saved Sergeant O'Boyle's life. Along with her officials, she had an air of both warmth and political sharpness, making it clear this was more than just a courtesy visit. Photos were taken, one with her, another with the B&B owners, and a few group shots. She asked what had brought me to this quiet part of Ireland. I told her about my Irish roots, how my great-grandfather had left during the potato famine and settled in Albany. This was my first time in Ireland, and from what I'd seen so far, I wasn't ready to leave just yet. The conversation shifted to my profession. I explained that I was an orthopedic surgeon, mostly dealing with bones, joints, and skeletal injuries. Sometimes, when needed, I performed general surgery, but cardiac and neurosurgery weren't my fields. The mayor and her group exchanged glances, and I could feel something unspoken in the air. When she asked if I was returning to my job in Albany soon, I told her no. I had resigned and was taking a break. More glances, more silent exchanges. The young policewoman from the station appeared, the one who had attempted CPR on the sergeant. I made sure to acknowledge her effort, saying she had done a great job before I arrived. She blushed, and the group laughed. Then the mayor caught my attention again. She wanted a private meeting at her office the next morning. There was a weight to her request, a tone that made it clear this wasn't something I could easily brush off. I agreed, though I had no idea what it was about. The rest of the day passed quietly. I walked through town, took in the slow pace of life, and limited myself to a single pint that evening. The next morning, after breakfast, I made my way to the mayor's office. A receptionist greeted me, already knowing who I was, and after a short wait, I was called in. The meeting wasn't what I expected. The town had a problem. Their only doctor had retired and moved abroad, leaving Castleroy without medical care. The nearest physician was in Tralee, nearly an hour away, and while Dublin had promised a replacement, there was no telling when they would arrive. Then came the real reason I was there. The mayor wanted me to stay, not as a visitor, but as their doctor. I stared at her, trying to process the request. I was a surgeon, not a small-town general practitioner, but to her, that didn't matter. The town needed help, and right now, I was their only option. She asked me to think about it, but not for too long.
After hours of frustrating phone calls with health officials in Dublin, the reality became clear. Castleroy wouldn't see a new doctor for at least a year. Dr. Kennedy, who had been holding on well past retirement, was slipping into forgetfulness. His daughter finally took him to South Africa, where she and her husband lived, likely as a step toward placing him in a nursing home. That left the town completely without a doctor. Desperate for a solution, I turned my attention to the unexpected American who had landed in our laps. The Garda, when properly motivated, can be surprisingly efficient. In just one night, they put together a brief profile on Dr. Aaron Brown, a top third medical school graduate from New York, board-certified surgeon, and, unfortunately, a man whose personal life had unraveled in the worst possible way. His wife's betrayal explained why he had drowned himself in Guinness that night. Now, I needed to make him an offer he couldn't easily refuse. I had a plan. More importantly, I had emergency authorization from the Department of Health allowing him to practice here. Whether Dublin liked it or not, Castleroy had just found its doctor. I spotted Dr. Brown leaving the mayor's office and walked toward him. Off duty for the day, I'd traded my uniform for something more flattering: a white blouse, fitted jeans, and high-heeled boots. My hair was down, and I'd even put on a little makeup. I wasn't about to pretend I didn't put effort into my appearance this morning. At 27, fit from years of running, I was confident in how I looked. I called his name, catching his attention, and when he turned, I greeted him properly, introducing myself as the constable who had assisted during Sergeant O'Boyle's heart attack. He looked surprised, as if seeing me for the first time. Without the Garda uniform, I was apparently unrecognizable.
The first time I met Amelia was a blur of flashing lights and chaos at the police station. When I saw her again at the B&B, she was in uniform, and my pounding hangover kept me from noticing much of anything. But now she was standing in front of me looking nothing like a cop. Her red hair framed her face, her complexion had a natural warmth, and her figure was flawless. How had I overlooked her before? Probably because I'd been too distracted by the madness of that night. She was striking, model-level stunning, and yet here she was, a police officer in a quiet Irish town.
Dr. Brown looked much better now than when I'd first seen him, far from the disheveled men I was used to dealing with after a night of heavy drinking. Most of them stumbled home the next morning, ashamed and regretful. But Brown? He had sobered up fast when it mattered. In that crucial moment, he had taken charge and saved a life. I had tried to help, but I had completely overlooked the defibrillator. If he hadn't been there, the sergeant might not have made it. In an odd way, it was lucky for O'Boyle that Dr. Brown had overindulged at the pub that night. Beyond being competent, he was undeniably attractive. I knew more about him than he realized. The mayor had shared the details. His wife's affair, the child that wasn't his, the way his life had unraveled back in America. I had even made the call to Dublin myself to pull his file. Now I just had to see what kind of man he really was.
I stepped out of the mayor's office, still processing everything, when I saw Amelia Kelly approaching. Out of uniform, she looked completely different. Red hair loose, wearing a white blouse, fitted jeans, and high-heeled boots. I barely recognized her. She greeted me with a warm smile and properly introduced herself as the constable who had assisted during Sergeant O'Boyle's emergency. It took me a moment to respond, mostly because I was stunned. Without the uniform, she was breathtaking. I mumbled something about not having concrete plans yet, but mentioned I was considering visiting the sergeant in the hospital before heading to the Ring of Kerry. She casually mentioned she was also heading to Tralee to check on O'Boyle and offered to give me a ride. There was no way I was turning that down. The drive was a blur, not because of the scenery, but because I was too focused on Amelia. I asked questions, wanting to know more about her. She grew up in Castleroy. Her father was a local lawyer, and her mother had raised her and her two brothers at home. She was 27, lived in an apartment near the police station, and planned to study law eventually, using her time as an officer to gain experience. She had been engaged once to a semi-professional footballer, but he left for Spain, and apparently found Spanish women more appealing. We visited the sergeant briefly. He had already heard about my so-called heroics and, with newfound motivation, declared he would get fit, give up fried food, and even train for a half marathon. Looking at him, I had my doubts. Amelia later mentioned that an inspector from Killarney had warned O'Boyle he'd be forced into early retirement if he didn't lose weight. Given his financial situation, he had little choice but to try. His wife, apparently, would make sure of it. Afterward, Amelia showed me around Tralee. A town of about 25,000, it had a port, a small airport, and 2 hospitals, making it sizable by Irish standards. Over lunch, she shared more about her background. She had studied political science at Trinity College, Dublin, focusing on EU defense policy and international relations. She never asked about my wife. I figured she had already heard enough from my drunken ramblings at the pub. I didn't bring it up either. By the time we returned to Castleroy, I realized I had never gotten around to visiting the Ring of Kerry. But I had no regrets. I wanted to see more of Amelia Kelly, and as long as I stayed in town, I knew I'd have the chance. 2 days later, I finally set out for my ride around the Ring of Kerry, and the scenery was breathtaking. I left early, grabbed a quick breakfast, and hit the road, making my way through Killorglin and Killarney. I stopped for gas and coffee, taking in the charm of the town before heading back onto the loop. Bill at the B&B had given me a useful tip: ride clockwise to avoid getting stuck behind the massive tourist buses traveling counterclockwise. The ride was incredible. The coastline, rolling hills, and endless green stretched out in every direction. I made several stops just to take it all in. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about my past, my failed marriage, or what came next. I was just here, in the moment, enjoying the ride. Then, as expected in Ireland, the rain came. It hit hard, a sudden downpour that had me pulling off to the side under a tree. Sitting sideways on my bike, I opened a soda and waited for the storm to pass. That's when I heard it. A loud crash from down the road. Smoke. I tossed the bottle into the ditch. Sorry, Ireland. Threw on my helmet, started the bike, and took off toward the wreck. It wasn't far. A minibus and a car had collided head-on, the narrow road leaving no room for error. The car was crushed, smoke rising from the engine. Oh, crap. This wasn't just a fender bender. Someone was seriously hurt. The crash site was a mess, smoke rising from the wreckage, the car's doors crushed, trapping the occupants inside. The back door had swung open, giving me access. Inside, the driver was injured but conscious, while the woman in the passenger seat was unresponsive. A quick check confirmed both had pulses. By then, other drivers had stopped, and I instructed someone to call emergency, requesting 4 ambulances, 2 for the car's victims and 2 for the minibus passengers, just in case. Moving them prematurely was risky, but the smoke made waiting even more dangerous. A bystander managed to contain the fire with an extinguisher, reducing immediate danger. The minibus passengers, elderly tourists on a scenic tour, were mostly in shock but unharmed, thanks to their seatbelts. One woman likely had a broken collarbone, common in older adults. Despite the pain, she insisted others be helped first. Keeping them engaged in conversation helped assess their overall condition and keep them calm. Back at the car, volunteers had wrapped the injured in blankets. The driver had a serious leg fracture, bleeding heavily. I applied a tourniquet to slow the blood loss, then, with help, carefully moved both victims out of the wreck and onto the roadside. The wait for ambulances felt endless. With only 2 available in Tralee, response time was stretched thin. In the meantime, I used the minibus's first aid kit to clean and dress wounds. The minibus driver, a retired accountant turned part-time tour guide, joked through the pain as I wrapped his arm, clearly trying to distract himself. When paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, loading patients into ambulances. One recognized me from Castleroy, recalling my involvement in saving Sergeant O'Boyle. After giving them a full report, I followed the ambulances to the hospital to ensure the doctors had a clear picture of the initial care given. I stayed for an hour, checked on everyone, then rode back to Castleroy. By the time I reached the B&B, night had fallen. A van was parked outside, and Bill and Mary greeted me with news. Reporters had been looking for me. Apparently, word had spread, and the local press now believed I had saved 7 lives single-handedly. Exhausted, I had no interest in an interview. While Bill excitedly explained that journalists were waiting at the pub, I had other priorities: food, a drink, a shower, and sleep. Instead of heading to the pub, I slipped in the opposite direction, hoping for a quiet meal before Bill inevitably led them straight to me. I managed to eat in peace, at least until he finally tracked me down, looking far too pleased with himself. Tracking down Aaron wasn't difficult. I had his number, even though it had an unfamiliar Irish country code. He needed to hear the latest developments, and I needed to know how he wanted to handle things. When he picked up, I got straight to the point. Maddie wasn't cooperating with the divorce. She claimed that if Aaron just met the baby, he'd change his mind and come home. Of course, he had no intention of doing that. Through my investigator, I confirmed the child's father, a high school gym teacher and soccer coach, conveniently married with kids of his own. He had no interest in leaving his family or supporting Maddie. That left her looking to Aaron for financial support. Legally, it was complicated. Any child born within a marriage was presumed to be the husband's unless challenged in court. Aaron had already taken precautions, ensuring the birth certificate listed the father as unknown, but Maddie was pushing for child support and spousal maintenance. I advised him to stay put. Returning to the U.S. would only give her lawyer the chance to drag him into court and hit him with immediate financial obligations. Aaron agreed. Ireland suited him for now. He wasn't coming back anytime soon.
Aaron's return to town didn't go unnoticed. News of his involvement in the accident had spread, and the media was eager to talk to him. He downplayed it, insisting that everyone had survived and that he had only provided first aid. But that wasn't how people saw it. I took the opportunity to press him again about staying. Dublin had approved a temporary medical license for a year. Castleroy and the entire region needed a doctor. He didn't commit. Instead, he said he planned to explore more of the area and would give me an answer when he returned. That was enough for now. Even if he only stayed 6 months, it would buy us time to find a permanent doctor.
I rode to Killarney to clear my head. After talking to Jim, one thing was certain. I wasn't going back to Maddie. Whether she regretted what she did or not didn't matter. That chapter of my life was closed. Lunch was uneventful, but on my way back to Castleroy, my phone buzzed with messages. Jim sent me a link. Apparently, I was on the news in the U.S., labeled a hero for saving lives in Ireland. Another message from Aaron, the mayor's assistant, asked me to call when I got back. At the B&B, Mary greeted me with her usual warmth, offering tea. I thanked her but declined, opting for a hot shower and a clean change of clothes before heading to the mayor's office. When I arrived, her secretary immediately let her know I was there. She wasted no time. "So, what's your decision?" I told her I'd stay. Her reaction was immediate. She practically hugged the life out of me. I was no longer just Dr. Brown. I was Aaron to them now, a sign that I was officially part of the community. But I had conditions. Her enthusiasm shifted as she realized she wasn't entirely in control of this negotiation. I listed my requirements, watching as she took notes, nodding along. Once I finished, I asked if she still wanted me here. Without hesitation, she assured me everything I requested could be arranged. Now it was time to start practicing medicine in Castleroy.
News spread fast in Castleroy, and Aaron agreeing to stay was no exception. By the end of the week, everyone would know he was replacing Dr. Kennedy, and the clinic would soon have a line out the door. Dr. Kennedy's patient files were still locked in the office, untouched since he left. The nurse had retired, and until now the building had been secured to keep everything intact. The mayor arranged for a young local graduate to be Aaron's secretary, and a nurse practitioner who had been handling urgent cases in the area would now be available more frequently.
Laura Tompkins, the nurse practitioner, was in her mid-30s, divorced, with a young daughter. She had moved to the area after leaving Dublin when her marriage fell apart. Her ex, a shipping manager, had been unfaithful, which made staying in the city unbearable. She was sharp, experienced, and would be a useful partner in the clinic. The office itself was a disaster. The air was stale, the space cluttered, and the whole place needed a deep clean. My new secretary, Nicole, was fresh out of school, enthusiastic and eager to impress. Her mother even dropped by to bring her lunch, clearly excited that her daughter had landed a real job. Before I could even begin organizing, patients started showing up. Nicole burst into the office in a panic. A man had arrived with his hand wrapped in a towel, pale and on the verge of passing out. His wife handed me a plastic bag. Inside was a severed finger. He had lost 2 fingers in a tractor accident, but they had only managed to recover one. I immediately had Nicole call the hospital in Tralee and arrange an ambulance. My focus was on controlling the bleeding and stabilizing his condition. He nearly lost consciousness when I unwrapped the injury, which, to be honest, I probably would have too if it were my hand. I packed the severed finger in ice, hoping the surgeons in Tralee could reattach it. An hour later, he was in an ambulance, and I had officially treated my first patient in Ireland. Later that day, Laura Tompkins stopped by for a quick introduction, before rushing off to pick up her daughter. She was clearly juggling a lot, but we exchanged contact information, knowing we'd be working closely together. With the clinic up and running, I turned to another issue. I needed my own place. The B&B was comfortable, but Bill and Mary's constant curiosity meant zero privacy. I wanted a small, furnished space with a decent kitchen and a spot for my motorcycle. Nothing permanent, just something practical until I figured out my next steps. I contacted a real estate agent and started looking. Within an hour, I had a few options lined up. It was time to settle in, at least for now. Josephine Landers, a friendly and efficient real estate agent, had already secured an apartment for me before I even started looking. Small towns worked fast. Word had spread and my name was already on the door. Dr. Aaron Brown, Maryland. They were confident I'd stay. The apartment, or flat as they called it, was compact but had everything I needed. Large windows, a balcony overlooking fields leading to the sea, and enough space for privacy. Josephine had even prepped local stores to stock essentials, ready to supply linens and towels as soon as I picked a color. This town really wanted a doctor. After moving my things from the B&B, I settled in, picking up basic necessities from the shops and stocking the fridge with food, beer, and, oddly, a bottle of white wine, though I rarely drank it alone. Then came a knock at the door.
Josephine had dropped off Aaron's new address at the station, casually slipping me the details before I headed home. After a long shift, I took a shower, changed into jeans and a sleeveless blouse, added a touch of makeup, then picked up Chinese takeout before heading to his place. When I rang the doorbell, I could hear the hesitation in his voice before he answered. I joked about a break-in, stepping inside with the food. He smirked, catching on. I didn't bring dinner for just anyone.
I woke up in an unfamiliar bed, momentarily disoriented before remembering. I had moved into my new place, and I wasn't alone. Beside me, Amelia stirred as I checked my phone. It was time to get up. After a lazy stretch, she followed me into the shower. That's how it started. Some people just refused to see reality. Maddie was one of them. She still believed Aaron would come back, that seeing the baby would change everything, that he'd magically forget she had an affair and accept raising another man's child. Legally, she was making things difficult. She wanted spousal support and child support, despite Aaron ensuring the birth certificate listed the father as unknown. While DNA evidence proved Aaron wasn't the father, courts often assumed children born within a marriage belonged to the husband, unless contested. I was handling that. Maddie's lawyer pushed for marriage counseling, claiming reconciliation was possible. It wasn't. Aaron had left the country, taken a new job, and made it clear he was done. Counseling required both parties' consent. This wasn't happening. Then there was the money. The baby's real father, a married high school soccer coach, wasn't in a position to support Maddie. He had his own family, a mortgage, and a modest income. Maddie wanted Aaron's salary, not her lover's. She even showed up at my office with the baby, hoping to convince me. It was pointless. The child wasn't Aaron's, and anyone with eyes could see that. She wasn't entitled to his money, his future, or his life. He had already walked away from their house, their shared assets, and everything they built. If she needed cash, she could sell the house and buy something smaller. This was over. She just hadn't accepted it yet.
The American doctor had agreed to stay, filling the void left by Dr. Kennedy's retirement, a long overdue decision considering his declining competence. I had often corrected his mistakes, but there was only so much I could do. His departure was necessary for patient safety. The town's rumor mill wasted no time spreading details about Dr. Aaron Brown. The mayor had thoroughly vetted him, confirming his credentials with medical authorities in Dublin and the U.S. His personal life was no secret either. Word of his nearly finalized divorce had circulated quickly. Unattached women in town would undoubtedly find excuses to see him, presenting minor ailments just to get a closer look. I had little free time between work and raising my daughter, but I'd make time to stop by his office. Professionally, of course. When I arrived at the clinic one morning, I wasn't surprised to see a line forming, mostly women.
Given the patient demand, I figured many cases could be handled by Laura Tompkins, the local nurse practitioner. A female provider might be a better choice for certain patients, especially for routine issues. I needed to coordinate with her, so I gave her a call.
While driving to my next patient, my phone rang through the car's hands-free system. It was Dr. Brown, asking if we could meet to discuss medical needs in the area. He admitted he was still adjusting and needed guidance on how things typically ran. I agreed. We'd find a time that worked. After all, helping a new doctor settle in was important, for both of us.
2 days later, Laura invited me to dinner at her house. A home-cooked meal was hard to refuse. I stopped at the store to grab a bottle of wine. 2, actually, since I wasn't sure what she preferred. When I arrived, the door swung open to reveal a little girl, no older than 4. She stared up at me, wide-eyed, before turning and calling out, "Mommy, the American is here!" Laura appeared, welcoming me inside. She was striking, tall, dark-haired, and effortlessly attractive. I stood there for a second before remembering the wine in my hand. I introduced myself to her daughter, Matilda, who promptly informed me she loved Winnie the Pooh and that Tigger was her favorite. She also made it clear that kids don't drink wine, only juice. Dinner was beef stew with fresh rolls. Laura smiled as she cooked while Matilda kept me occupied with a coloring book, ensuring I followed her strict artistic guidelines. Pigs are beige, not red. After dinner, Matilda changed into pajamas and returned with a request. I was to read her Winnie the Pooh. Laura didn't object. As I read, she tidied up the kitchen. Between the warmth of the home, the simplicity of the evening, and the way Matilda nestled against me while I read, I couldn't help but think. This was what real life looked like. A family, stability, something I hadn't even realized I missed.
Matilda had completely won over Aaron. My daughter had a way of capturing people's hearts, except her father's. I didn't invite men over often, especially not around Matilda. But Aaron was different. I already knew plenty about him, his past, his arrival in Castleroy, and the heartbreak that brought him here. He understood loss, the same kind I had experienced when I left my ex-husband in Dublin. I also knew I wasn't the only woman interested. Amelia Kelly was circling, and she knew how to charm men. She was younger, maybe even prettier, but I had something she didn't. Aaron already felt connected to my world. The way he looked at Matilda while reading to her said more than words ever could.
Dinner with Laura was perfect. Matilda was a bright, sweet kid, and spending time with her felt oddly natural. I returned home close to midnight, showered, and got into bed, exhausted from the past few days. Just as I was about to sleep, my phone rang. A U.S. number, but unknown. Probably my parents. It wasn't. Maddie. She pleaded for me to talk, but I cut her off. There was nothing left to say. Whatever we had ended the moment she betrayed me. I blocked the number and went to sleep.
I had competition. Laura Tompkins had made her move, and by the looks of it, she had an advantage. She was attractive, smart, and already had Aaron in her home. But I had something she didn't. I was single, with no child tying me down. This wasn't over.
Maddie was becoming a nightmare. No matter how many times she was told Aaron wanted nothing to do with her, she refused to listen. She cheated, had another man's child, and now expected Aaron to just forget everything? Delusional. Aaron texted me. Somehow, Maddie got his number in Ireland and called him. He wanted a restraining order. The problem? Judges in our state rarely grant them unless there's a physical threat. Emotional distress wouldn't be enough. I told him not to get his hopes up, but I'd try.
Weeks passed, and Aaron had been to dinner at my house 3 times. Then on Saturday, he invited Matilda and me for a picnic in Killarney National Park. Matilda adored him, and Aaron seemed to enjoy every moment with her. They walked hand in hand, and at one point, she insisted on riding on his shoulders. We had lunch at Ladies' View, then stopped at Torque Waterfall, where he took pictures to send to his parents. That night, after Matilda had fallen asleep, we made love for the first time. It had been so long since I let anyone in, and I knew Aaron felt the same hesitancy. But in that moment, we both needed it. Needed each other. As we lay in bed the next morning, I hoped Amelia Kelly would show her true colors before it was too late.
Jimmy called with news about my divorce. Maddie was still dragging her feet, refusing to sign the papers. The court suggested marriage counseling. Counseling? After everything? I had left the country to escape her, yet she still believed this could be salvaged. I told Jimmy to do whatever it took to finalize the divorce. I wasn't going back, not now, not ever.
I needed to find Aaron. His mother slipped up when I called, revealing he was in Ireland. That was enough. Now I just needed to figure out where exactly. I had to see him in person, make him understand. When I first told him I was pregnant, he was thrilled. He painted the nursery, bought baby clothes, even a baseball glove. He was ready to be a father. Once he holds her, he'll remember. He'll know leaving was a mistake. Meanwhile, Roger, the real father, was avoiding me. Wouldn't return calls, wouldn't even look at me at school. Maybe his wife had found out. It didn't matter. I was going to Ireland.
The hospital in Tralee needed help, badly. Their orthopedic surgeon was out indefinitely due to cancer treatment, leaving a backlog of surgeries. They asked if I could step in for a few days. It wasn't a tough decision, I agreed. Just as I was about to leave for Tralee, an emergency call came in. A young motorcyclist had crashed into a car at over 80 miles per hour. His arms were nearly severed, and without immediate surgery, he'd lose them both. Before I could get on my bike, a police car pulled up. Amelia Kelly behind the wheel. The hospital had called, and since the helicopter was unavailable, she was my ride. We sped to Tralee, covering the 27-kilometer distance in record time. Once there, I rushed inside, met with the ER team, and scrubbed in. The neurosurgeon showed me the patient's ID, 18 years old. Damn, the surgery lasted 11 hours. I reattached both arms while a neurosurgeon worked on his head injuries, and a plastic surgeon reconstructed his face. The kid had hit the car so hard his helmet cracked, tearing his face apart. By the end, I was exhausted. I needed food, a bathroom, and sleep. But the work wasn't over. I had 8 more surgeries scheduled over the next 4 days. The hospital hoped I could return every 2 weeks to help manage their workload. I agreed. The Irish had been good to me. It was time to give back. When it became clear I wouldn't make it back to Castleroy that night, I called Amelia. 30 minutes later, she pulled up in a police car, lights flashing. Her red hair was tied back, and she looked, well, stunning. I had just wrapped up my last patient for the day when the front door opened. Assuming it was Nicole forgetting something, I called out that we were closed. Then I heard her voice, Maddie. I looked up, and there she was, standing in my office like she belonged there. My stomach dropped. She had found me. She looked good. Motherhood had softened her in ways that might have been appealing if not for the betrayal. But I wasn't fooled. She got straight to the point. She wanted me to come home. I sat down, exhaling slowly to keep my anger in check. What the hell did she expect? Did she think I'd just forget she had a child with another man? That I'd pretend nothing had happened? She started talking about love, about our 4 years of marriage, about how she and our daughter needed me. Our daughter? I shut that down immediately. She and her boyfriend had a daughter, not me. He could step up and be a father. I wasn't playing that role. She didn't back down, insisting she missed me, that I could still be a good father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And then, before I could lose my temper, something or someone saved me. The moment Amelia walked in, I felt relief. Dressed in skinny jeans and a sleeveless top, her red hair loose, she looked incredible. Without hesitation, I pulled her close and kissed her, making sure Maddie saw exactly where I stood. Introducing them was unnecessary, but I did it anyway, sarcasm laced in my voice. Amelia's expression was priceless, like she was inspecting something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. Without missing a beat, she smoothly reminded me that we had dinner plans with her parents. That wasn't true, but I appreciated the assist. Maddie, of course, ignored the hint. She insisted we needed to talk, but Amelia cut her off, making it clear we were leaving. If this were a bar fight, people would have gathered to watch. Maddie's persistence was almost impressive. But I wasn't playing along. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. My lawyer had already handled everything. Divorce was nearly final. The judge even asked who the father was, and Maddie's lawyer simply admitted that it wasn't me. That moment alone must have been humiliating. Once the house sold, she'd walk away with around $90,000, enough to start over. And that was fine. Consider it the price I paid for learning the hard way. I had no plans for the future, at least not yet. For now, I was staying in Ireland, working at the clinic and hospital, figuring things out. But life had a way of throwing surprises my way.
This wasn't how I expected things to go. I had left the baby with my parents, hoping that if Aaron saw me, really saw me, he'd come home. I worked hard to lose the pregnancy weight, bought new clothes, even wore the perfume he used to love. Then that woman showed up. I knew she was wearing Chanel. I could smell it. She thought I'd just walk away? Not a chance. The hotel I was staying in was miserable. Tiny, outdated, barely enough space to move. How did people live like this? My mother was already irritated about taking care of the baby, saying people were asking too many questions. Some assumed I had adopted a child. She never corrected them. None of that mattered. What mattered was Aaron, and I wasn't leaving without a fight.
Amelia had impeccable timing. Whether or not she actually had dinner plans, I didn't care. I took her out anyway. Later, she ended up back at my apartment. And in the morning, I made her breakfast.
I wandered the village after dinner, trying to understand what Aaron saw in this place. It was small, quiet, nothing like home. I learned that restaurants were called pubs, short for public house. I learned Aaron only saw patients 3 days a week. I learned that everyone in town admired him. The pub regulars eagerly shared stories about how he saved a police officer, then helped tourists after a terrible crash. Then I returned to my tiny hotel, where the owners, Mary and Bill, offered me tea. We talked about the doctor, how much he had done for the community. When I mentioned I was from Albany, Mary's expression changed. She quickly did the math. She knew who I was. Within moments, she disappeared into the kitchen, whispering with Bill. The next morning, I went to Aaron's clinic. A teenage girl at the front desk barely looked up when I asked to see him. He's not in today. Why not? Surgery day in Tralee. I asked when he'd be back, but she just flipped through the schedule. He's busy all week. Maybe come on Monday. I left, frustrated. The town felt even smaller now. I wandered, bought a terrible cup of coffee, and tried to figure out where to go, and where he lived, maybe with her. I needed to find out. The police informed me that an American woman had arrived in town asking about Dr. Brown. It didn't take a detective to figure out it was his estranged wife, Madeline, likely trying to drag him back to Albany. That wasn't going to happen. After a quick conversation with Mary, I learned that she had already gone to the clinic looking for him, only to find he was in Tralee, handling a backlog of orthopedic surgeries. That wouldn't stop her. Madeline needed to leave, and fortunately I had a reliable ally in Constable Amelia Kelly. Not only was she strikingly beautiful, but she had an undeniable presence that commanded attention. However, her time in Castleroy was limited. She'd soon be heading to Trinity College in Dublin to begin law school, following in her father's footsteps. Mary and Bill understood what was at stake. Conveniently, the boarding house was suddenly found to be out of compliance with health regulations. The only guest, Madeline, was informed she needed to vacate immediately. Her belongings were packed, and Bill, ever polite, refunded her money and even booked her a room at the nearest hotel in Killarney. She was furious, but we all had to make sacrifices to keep a doctor in town. Bill understood that well. Unbelievable. I got kicked out of my hotel over some bogus health inspection and was being shipped off to Killarney, and of course it was pouring rain. I hated Ireland. To make matters worse, my mother called, demanding to know when I was coming home. Then, as if the universe wasn't done with me, I got a reminder email. My maternity leave was ending in a week. I had to return to work. Perfect. Here's the thing. I really wanted Aaron to meet my parents. He was probably the best guy I'd ever been with. He was loyal, firm in his beliefs, and had real integrity, even when faced with his ex-wife's manipulations. That meant something. But reality was setting in. I'd be leaving soon for Dublin, and when I did, I wasn't planning on living like a nun. I loved closeness, and I wasn't ready to pretend otherwise. It wouldn't be fair to ask Aaron to stay faithful when I knew I wouldn't. He wasn't the type to date casually or play games, so I had to end this, sooner rather than later.
Small-town gossip worked faster than any news service. I called it KSS, the Castleroy Surveillance System. Through it, I learned two things. 1, Amelia was heading to Dublin for law school in August. 2, she wasn't the type to settle down, and I wasn't the type to play the fool. Our time together had an expiration date, and I knew better than to cling to something temporary. If I let myself fall too hard, it would destroy me when she inevitably moved on. So, I enjoyed what we had, knowing it wouldn't last. I'd never say anything stupid like love or forever, not this time. Besides, there were other people I was more interested in getting to know. 4 months later, the promised replacement doctor was nowhere in sight. When I called the hospital administrator in Tralee, they assured me they'd look into it. That was weeks ago. Still nothing. Meanwhile, Amelia was in Dublin, thriving in law school. We had ended things amicably, knowing from the start it was never meant to last. But for what it was, it had been one hell of a ride.
Months had passed since Amelia left for Dublin, and between work and raising Matilda, my personal life had taken a back seat. So when Aaron called and invited us to the Killarney Fair for the weekend, I was surprised, but not entirely. With Amelia gone, I figured he was feeling the absence of female company. Lucky for him, I was too. Matilda was thrilled, running to her room to pick out her outfit, even though it was only Wednesday and we weren't leaving until Saturday. When the weekend arrived, I expected Aaron to show up on his motorbike, but instead, he arrived in an Audi sedan. Turns out, the mayor had arranged a cheap rental for him, covering only insurance and fuel. It made his weekly trips to Tralee for surgery much more comfortable than battling Irish weather on a bike. Matilda eagerly jumped into the back seat, but I made her get out while Aaron secured her child's seat. She watched him closely, fascinated by the process. The fair was everything a child could dream of: rides, cotton candy, and unlimited junk food. Matilda held Aaron's hand the entire time, and I caught him stealing glances at her, his face softening. He liked this more than he realized. Afterward, we had a proper dinner before heading home. I invited Aaron in, and Matilda wasted no time pulling him into her room. She demanded a bedtime story. Half an hour later, he returned to the kitchen, looking relaxed. "She's out cold. Fresh air and sugar crash," he said, taking the glass of wine I handed him. We talked late into the night. He opened up about his past, how deeply Maddie's betrayal had wounded him, how blindsided he'd been when he realized the child wasn't his. If she had been honest, he would have given her a divorce and moved on. Instead, she had lied, manipulated, and shattered their marriage. Now, with the divorce finalized, he felt free in a way he hadn't before. He was determined never to let history repeat itself, never to be deceived like that again. I knew that a little girl was already looking at him like a father, and so far it seemed like he didn't mind.
Aaron, your divorce has been final for a while now. I sent you the official paperwork, and I have copies if you ever need them. You're free. Go get yourself into whatever trouble you want. Aaron laughed. Jimmy, I owe you everything. Just pay my bill when you get it. We both knew Maddie's last-ditch effort had failed. She had returned home, playing the struggling single mother routine. Her family had washed their hands of her, telling her to deal with the mess she made. As for the actual father, he had enough problems of his own. The guy was terrified she'd come after him for child support, so he was avoiding her entirely. And considering he didn't have much to offer, she was out of luck. So what's next? I asked. Heading back to the States, or are you planning to become an Irish citizen? Aaron hesitated. I don't know. It's different here, but I like it. And I met someone I think could make me really happy. A woman with a kid? Aaron groaned. Yes, Laura's a nurse, smart, beautiful, and a great mother. But the child isn't yours. No, but she didn't lie to me, didn't betray me. There's a huge difference between her and Maddie. Maddie destroyed everything we had with her affair. When I saw that baby wasn't mine, it hit me like a freight train. I knew in that moment our marriage was dead. That's why I left Albany. Well, I said, you sure as hell succeeded in leaving. 2 years later. Aaron, come on! Laura's voice pulled me from my daze. Crap, I'll grab the bag. I ran to the closet, grabbing the pre-packed hospital bag. It was time. I called ahead to the hospital in Tralee as we rushed out. My parents were fussing, making sure we had everything. Matilda hugged us both, grinning ear to ear. "Bring me a brother," she demanded. I laughed as I helped Laura into the car. With police escorting us, we made it to the hospital in record time. 9 hours later, Annabelle Marie Brown was born. As I held her tiny hand, feeling her grip my finger, I made a mental note. Next time, maybe Matilda would get that baby brother she wanted.
And just like that, my story came full circle. I had found a man who wanted a real family, who embraced both me and my daughter without hesitation. From the very beginning, Aaron had been mine. Now I shared him with Matilda and with Annabelle, and maybe, just maybe, with one more in the future. Some women don't realize when they have something good. Maddie had been a fool, and her loss became my happiness. Aaron and I weren't searching for each other. We just found each other. And now, we were a family. And if anyone tried to come between us, they'd have to deal with me. Even you, Amelia Kelly.